Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week, Central Texas Gardener highlights weatherproof succulent plants for whatever the weather throws our way. On tour, see how succulent plants replace turf grass in a San Antonio garden. Daphne makes her pick of the week and answers our top viewer question. And Jeff Pavlot demonstrates how to repot succulents. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
More and more succulent plants are making their way into our designs. On tour, see how they captivate a San Antonio front yard to replace thirsty lawn.
When Carol and Richard Blocker go out front, it isn't to see whether it's time to mow. It was a chance event in San Antonio that catapulted them into serious collection and design with cactus and succulent plants.
I grew up in South Florida, and my dad always had cactus and plants growing in the yard down there because it doesn't freeze. And I moved to Texas. I lived in Houston, and we had a lot of tropical plants, and we bought a few cactus at a nursery one time and made a dish garden, and we fell in love with them. And we moved to San Antonio, and they were having a cactus show and sale, and we walked in the mall, and we didn't even know there was a cactus club. And there was vendors selling plants up and down the mall, and there was just thousands of different plants. And then we found out that there was a club, and we joined the club, and that was 32 years ago, and we've been growing them ever since.
When they bought their house, Carol and Richard knew just how they wanted to replace the front yard's languishing trees and dead grass. To start, they shaped gravel-based mounds topped with a gritty soil mix.
I put a limestone base down first and mounded that up, and then just put my cactus mix that I made, sandy, gravelly mix on top of that. Everybody always thinks that they need to dig out and refill in. And it's so much easier just to build up where you can have some contour and some slopes to it for drainage. And you can just build up on top of your normal native soil that we have here. The neighbors weren't sure what was going on at first when I started cutting down the trees. And I told them that I'm gonna plant cactus. And it was years before I actually got the whole front yard to where it looks semi-finished, but it's an ongoing, ever-changing garden.
After years of drought, the neighbors are considering a new look too. From the Blockers, they've learned that a well-designed cactus and succulent garden is like any other. It's about contrast in colors, size, and texture, responding to individual needs and grouping suitable combinations to intrigue the eye.
There's such a variety of cactus and succulents. It's one of the biggest families of plants in the world, and just their shapes and the textures and how they grow, and they're just so unique and different.
Their flowers aren't long-lasting, but like other fleeting garden jewels, their brevity heightens the appreciation.
The cactus flowers are one of the most beautiful there are in the world to me.
They savor their miniature gardens on the backyard patio. Carol and Richard also have an eye for garden art scavenges. It's in fact that they pair cold tender plants with cold hardy ones. In winter, Richard rolls down the sides of his cabana and adds plastic to the ends. Especially tender specimens go into the greenhouse. Oddly enough, it's too much summer sun that can hurt some plants, especially small new divisions.
Everybody thinks that all cactus are going to take full sun all the time, and that's not true. If you walk out in the desert, a lot of times you're going to find smaller cactus growing next to a bigger cactus or to another bush, or a lot of them even grow under bushes where they don't even get full sun. And so you want to make little microclimates where one plant's shading another plant, or you can grow a plant next to a rock where it gets shade part of the day. You could tell that they actually will sunburn just like people. And their skin will start turning a little yellow instead of just bright green.
And small plants do need some water in times of drought, though not much. Since many of their plants are prolific, they started passing them along.
I love the plants, and I just got to where I thought this is a neat thing to share with other people. And that's another neat thing about it. You can always add some, remove some, change the look, and that's the fun of doing a cactus garden. It's not something that you plant a bush and you have to just leave it this way for the entire life of the garden.
All right, thanks for opening your garden gates for us. And right now we're going to be talking about my favorite plant family. I'm really looking forward to this. We're talking about the agaves, these beautiful woody lilies, which may surprise a lot of our folks out there that these are actually lilies. I'm joined by Bob Barth, who is one of our routine guests here at the Central Texas Gardener. And I say that in the best sense because you're such an expert in this wonderful field of cacti and succulents. So welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And agaves are certainly one of my favorite groups of plants as well. And, they are, of course, strictly New World plants, even though they have been brought around the world. But
you see them on every continent now.
Oh, yeah,
but
you do.
One of our proud exports from the New World, I would say. And you know, we're going to be talking about the varieties of agave, and really, they've become very popular in the past decade or so. But a lot of people still have kind of a very elemental way of thinking about them. They think of agave americana and kind of in a unidimensional way. They either get all big or they're going to stay the size that they see them in the pots.
That's true, and that, of course, is not true because there's a great deal of variation in size and in shape and in color too, from dark greens and various other shades of greens, through blue greens and blue grays, and then occasionally you get the variegated ones with yellow, and others with white markings, and some of them with those curly fibers along the edge of the leaves, and so forth and so on. So there's quite a lot of diversity, really, in the garden.
Great deal of diversity, I would say, and in terms of the way that you can use them in the garden as well, sun or shade. Uniformly, though, they do all like good drainage.
Definitely good drainage, yeah. And, you know, if you live in an area of heavy clay soils, building a raised bed tends to work very well.
Yeah, use a lot of granite gravel and raise the bed up. That's what I tell.
Exactly.
Works very well for me.
True.
Well, we have a small group of plants we're going to start with, and I wanted to show these together at first because at first blush, for a lot of our viewers, they may look at these plants and they think they are all going to grow up to be rather similar, but there's tremendous diversity right here in just these 3 plants. The one that is in the foreground is actually happens to be my favorite species of agave, or at least the one that I've used. It is Agave Perryi truncata, and this is a really small agave.
Yeah, it only gets up to about 30 inches max, so it's not really tiny, but it's a nice manageable size, and tends to be very compact. You know, they sometimes call it the artichoke agave, and it comes from the highlands of central Mexico, but is perfectly cold hardy in our climate.
Well, I love the form. I love the color of this plant, and the fact that it does have that nice compact size. In my last garden, most of them, they hadn't fully matured yet, but they were all about 18 inches in size.
Right.
Now, immediately next to that is what is called whale's tongue agave. And I forget the botanical
That's agave ovatifolia.
Ovatifolia.
Yeah, and it's a northern Mexico species. It's very cold hardy. Interestingly enough, only in the last few years has it become common in the trade and available for landscape use. You're seeing more and more of it. And it does get large, anywhere from 48 to 72 inches. So that's 4 to 6 feet. And that's mostly width. It doesn't get terribly tall, probably not taller than these 2.5 feet or something.
Broad splaying leaves, hence the name whale's tongue. And very dramatic form, I think, on this plant. I think it's a very striking one.
Yeah, but if you're going to plant that in your garden, you better have plenty of room for it.
Right. And of course, the gray foliage in all these is to tip off that these are all sun-loving plants as well. Some of the agaves we'll be talking about are not, and we'll call those out as we go. So we've talked about the Perryi truncata and the whale's tongue agave. Right next to those is what looks like it's going to be a very compact little plant. That's Parasana.
Parasana, yeah. It gets to be about the same size as Perryi truncata and is fairly similar, really. And of course, all 3 of those do like quite a lot of sun, although where agaves grow in my garden, they're going to be shaded part of the day because we have quite a few trees.
Well, let's talk about this, because this one thing that a lot of people do make mistakes with on the agaves. They assume they're all desert species that don't like to be watered, that can stand no shade whatsoever. And in my experiences, they all do very well with a little bit of shade, at least some. And occasionally will actually show drought stress if they don't get water.
Well, they will, and it's like last summer, they will tend to turn yellowish, and last summer is one of the few times I've ever had to really water the agaves in my garden to keep them from turning yellowish. I mean, if they turn yellowish temporarily during a prolonged hot spell, when it cools off or starts raining again, they'll go back to their normal color.
Of course, you like to keep your garden looking good, as do we all. Nobody wants to look at pale yellow agaves.
Exactly.
But just to note to people that a little bit of water occasionally is not such a bad thing for these plants. Now, one right next to you, this is one that is highly sculptural. Very striking plant with a particularly vicious terminal spine on it.
Right.
And this is called shark skin agave, and it's actually a hybrid form of agave, right?
Yeah, it is a hybrid. It's a hybrid between a form of Agave Victoria Regina, which we'll talk about in a moment, and Agave Scabra, which is a large growing agave. So this is one that really gets a pretty fair size, up to about 40 inches in diameter.
And I have to say, I mean, the shark skin is very illustrative of this plant, and the name really tells you what. And you touch this, and it's basically what you would expect a shark skin to feel like.
Yeah, you can feel the roughness,
right.
And that comes from the Scabra plant parent, actually.
And again, the form on this is rather distinctive. Very fleshy leaves that are almost triangular in a way, and very different looking than the other plants we've talked about. And if you're looking for something for that kind of sculptural effect in the garden, I think this is a really strong one.
Yes, and yes, indeed.
Yeah, and pups out pretty well too. You know, a lot of these, we should talk about whether or not they pup out or are aggressive, because occasionally these plants can kind of claim some territory.
Yes, they can.
Okay, so shark skin is there, and speaking of territorial, I'm going to pick this one up a little bit. This is one that will, again, spread out and form a nice little clump. And this is striata, agave striata. Doesn't look at all really like the other plants we've talked about.
That is true. And it gets medium-sized, and that particular form of striata, there are a number of different forms, with good sunlight, actually the leaves turn lavender in color, so it can be a very spectacular plant. And the one that I've had growing in a sunny spot in my yard for quite a few years has decided to bloom, and with the lavender leaves and a purple bloom stalk rising up out of the center. It's really spectacular. But the interesting thing about, you know, most agaves, once they decide to bloom, they bloom, and that's the end of their life. But that's not true of striata. Striata will bloom, and then it will go ahead and produce 2 or 3 more heads of leaves.
Oh, great. Great. So striata is one to look for. It's particularly this color form. I've seen it in the green before, and I've gardened with the green form.
Right.
But this color form is gorgeous. Now, right next to it, we have here agave. I never can say this correctly. Shadiguera.
Shadiguera. I just call it Shadiguera. Yeah.
And on the trade, it's called Durango Delight.
Right.
And it is, I think, a fabulous plant. And I love. You can see the curlicue hairs on the edge of this one.
On the edge of the leaves, and there are actually several other species of agaves that we see in the trade that have that same feature, and it also has some white markings on the leaves.
Right.
And it gets up to maybe 2 to 3 feet in diameter, and it's quite cold hardy. Likes probably a little more shade than these bluish agaves that we were talking about earlier.
Take a few more hours to shade for sure. And probably the most common small agave is Victoria Regina. And this one is a really cold hardy specimen.
Yes, it is. The one that is still alive in my garden, it doesn't even show any signs of blooming as of yet. It's been there for more than 35 years. It is at the maximum size for the species of 24 inches, 2 feet. And it survived 4 degrees in 1989.
Oh, that's great. There are a couple over here that are shade lovers. We didn't get to talk about those in particular, but I do want to let people know that folks can meet you, Bob, and actually purchase plants from you at the Austin Cactus and Succulent Show and Sale, which is going to be on Labor Day weekend this year, right?
That is correct. Just Saturday and Sunday of Labor Day weekend at the Austin Area Garden Center.
Well, and I hope people will avail themselves of your expertise and your plants at that time. And as always, it's a pleasure visiting with you about these plants, which I could probably spend the rest of the day talking with you about. But anyway, thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I enjoy the opportunity.
Great. All right, thanks, Bob. And coming up next, our friend Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Richards, and this is Augie Doggy. Our question this week is, can plants actually sun scald? And the answer is yes, they can. The sun can damage plants in several ways. The most obvious is when you see actual brown burn spots on the leaves. The intense heat of the sun simply bakes the leaf tissue, killing it. You may also see sun scald on the fruit of peppers and tomatoes if the fruit is exposed to the intense light of the late afternoon sun. Another common sun injury is on the southwest side of the trunk of young trees. When trees are young, their bark is not very thick and can easily be damaged by the intense rays of the sun. The bad news is there's nothing to be done for sun scald once it's occurred. Dead plant tissue cannot be repaired. But the good news is sun scald can be easily avoided. First, you should know whether or not your plant can take full sun. And the label that accompanied the plant when you bought it may or may not be correct on this issue, so do a little extra research. Also, even plants that can take the full sun need to be acclimated to it if they haven't ever experienced it. A plant that's been on your porch for several weeks out of the direct sun will no longer be able to handle those bright rays. So start by moving the plant into the full sun for a few hours in the morning, slowly lengthening the time to all day before you put it in the ground. Our plant of the week is Ruby Crystals grass, Melanus nerviglumus pink crystals. My friend Jenny first introduced me to this lovely little ornamental grass, which makes a wonderful addition to very dry areas in the landscape, especially in xeric gardens with decomposed granite beds. It stays small, getting only about 18 to 24 inches tall and a little less wide. The delicate light green foliage clumps from a single base, the same as other ornamental grasses. But the real showstopper on this plant is the rosy pink, softly textured seed heads that sway gently in the breeze. Ruby Crystals grass prefers the full, intense sun, takes very little water, even during establishment, and looks great from spring all the way through summer. The seed heads detach and blow away once they've dried, and the plant reseeds easily around the garden. So keep an eye out for it in areas where you might not want it to grow, and simply pull the seedlings before they get very big. To do in your garden this week, it's time to plant transplants of any summer vegetables for your fall garden. You can easily get a second season of tomatoes, peppers, and other warm season vegetables before the cold sets in just a few months. If you'd like to protect them even later into the cool weather with a hoop house or other such protective device, you can even keep them a little bit longer and have a later harvest. But wait a few more weeks to plant any cold season vegetables like spinaches and lettuces. And a great resource for information on vegetables for our area is the Texas AgriLife Extension Service website, where we've put information on vegetables that are great for our area. This information was all developed here locally by Extension and the Master Gardeners, and we list things like which cultivars do well for us and what time of year those things should be planted. The Master Gardeners also offer workshops throughout the year with Extension at Zilker Botanical Garden and other places around town. So we'd love to see you at one of our workshops soon. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your questions or plants of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Jeff Pavlot for Backyard Basics.
Welcome to Backyard Basics. I'm Jeff Pavlot. Two of the questions I get asked the most about cacti and succulents are what kind of soil do you use and how do you pot spiny plants without sticking yourself? Today I'm going to talk a little about both. I'm going to start out with potting soil. There are a number of different mixes that will work equally well, but I like to use a simple mix of 8 parts high-quality potting soil, 5 parts of perlite or pumice. This happens to be pumice, but perlite works equally well, and 3 parts of granite sand. And the finished mix should look pretty much like this. And now to repot a spiny plant, to keep from getting stuck, I would use either an old hand towel, old t-shirt, or even newspaper to cover the top of the plant, and then you're able to turn it upside down. So I'll pull it out of its pot, and I want to break up the root ball just a little bit so that the roots can work their way into the new soil. And then go ahead and put it into a new pot. I'll put a little bit of soil down into the bottom to start out. You want to keep the base of the plant at the same level it was in the original soil. If you bury your plant too deep down in, it actually can cause the plant to rot more easily. All right, and get it positioned where I want. And then add soil around. And then you can use the piece of wooden dowel rod to press the soil down in. Add just a little bit more soil. And then I like to top dress my soil with granite gravel. It really is just an aesthetic choice. And just put it up around the top of the soil. And you can use the large tweezers to press it in around the base of the plant. And then you can just add your label and you're done. And with a little care, you can minimize getting stuck, but the truth is I often get stuck a little. However, I think the plants are beautiful enough to be worth it. For Backyard Basics, I'm Jeff Pavlot.
Visit klru.org/CTG to watch online and get more tips. Until next time, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online, and follow CTG's blog, check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.